Omaha, Nebraska, and was there for about 4 years until my father finished college. And he was first generation in his family to go to school, took advantage of GI Bill benefits. He was World War II. He was in Europe. When he got over there, he was stationed initially at Saint Nazaire or Saint Lazaire, France. It was a submarine base for the Germans. And then he ended up at the end of the war in Bensberg, Germany, and they were getting ready to ship over to the Pacific Theater when Japan surrendered. And instead of going to the Pacific, they went home. His first job after he graduated from University of Nebraska in Omaha, UNO, he was school superintendent for a small rural school in Nebraska. It was his hometown where he grew up. And a lot of his buddies, high school acquaintances and that, were former military. And I never really heard them tell war stories, but they would seem to focus on the good times. You know, that type of thing. That was pretty typical of growing up in rural America. There were a lot of veterans there. The small town in, Spalding, Nebraska, a town of 600 people, there was kind of like a billboard, if you remember what those were like, and it was a homemade one, and it had the names of all the veterans, branch of service, and if they had lost their lives, there was a star next to their name. But, you know, I thought, you know, maybe I'll get my name up there someday. I started out of high school. I enrolled in University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and I was just 17, not ready to go back to school again. Dropped out after about 2 months and worked part-time initially at a restaurant, and then after I was done with school, I worked full-time with them for a little over a year, and then ended up enlisting in the Marine Corps. I was growing up, and it was Air Force, Air Force, Air Force. But I had a cousin my age who went in the Marine Corps, and when he came back from basic training, he said, I ought to do that. So I did it, and you know, I first thought that went through my mind, standing on the yellow footprints, I'd like to wring his neck. 60s was about the time that they were being investigated for their tactics, you know, that type of thing. Basic training was 13 weeks. It was west, MCRD, San Diego. We spent a period of time, as all Marines did, at the rifle range up at Camp Pendleton, and came back, had a few weeks left, then finished up. My initial MOS was an 03 something. It wasn't an 0311. But at that time, they had an MOS for sea school, and it was to train Marines that would be part of a detachment on board a ship. Anyway, I had to go to infantry training, and was in there for 4 weeks. And the last week, the first sergeant called me into his office and said, you know, looking at your test scores, we see that you qualify for electronics school. We have some new radio equipment. We really need people that know how to work on it, that sort of thing. And you know, I thought, go back to school. I don't know about that. And then I asked him where the school was, and he said it was at the Marine base in San Diego. So long story short, I had to extend my enlistment for a year because the school was about a year long. And after I signed it, he said, oh, by the way, if you flunk out, you still owe us that year, and you'll be an 03, whatever it was I was headed for. So went to San Diego. The school was very structured. First school, basic electronics, 15 weeks long. And every week you'd have a test, and the lowest score in the class had to repeat that week, and you know, that sort of thing. So I survived that, and there were 2 or 3 other schools that followed after that. And in between the schools there was downtime where, you know, I was in the post office there for a while. Then one other time it was in the butcher shop on the base, and I thought it was civilians I was working with there, helping, you know, carry meat into the freezers and stuff. And he opened his locker up, and there hung a gunnery sergeant's uniform. We had some old tube radios that we learned how to repair, operate, that type of thing. And one of them was ancient. It was called an Anger 10. And then there was a Track 27, and that was a little more modern. And then there was a Track 97, and that was a microwave radio. It took a truck to transport it. It was like a camper on the back of a truck, but you get to your radio site, they'd have a tow truck in there, hoist it off and set it up, and two big 8-foot parabolic antennas and that type of thing. So it probably was outdated when the Marine Corps got it. They had a reputation for getting hand-me-downs, that type of thing. But it served its purpose. We had a lot of those. They were relay stations set up at various points, relaying from here to other places. So after we finished up with the radio repair school, all the courses, the final one was radio relay school, and I can't remember how long it was. But when we finished up, we got our orders. There were openings. Well, we got a choice according to our rank. And this is interesting. There was one guy in the class, his name was Burley Ash, and he just got married. He had the lowest grade point average out of all of us, and everybody passed up one open billet in the United States so Burley could have time with his new bride. I didn't have any options. Most of the openings were for Vietnam, and we had to do some training before we went over. We were at Camp Pendleton, simulated that we were captured POWs and we had to escape at night, that type of thing. And from there, and there was still a large number of my original class in that group when we went to Camp Pendleton to train before deploying to Vietnam. And we left, I think we flew out of Norton or March Air Force Base. Whichever one it was a charter aircraft. It was Continental Airlines, and they were doing that type of thing, I think, for all the branches of the service at that time. We flew, we stopped in Hawaii to refuel, went to Okinawa. We were there for several days, and we were waiting to hear our number called. And mine was the first one to call to head to Vietnam, Da Nang. And I got there and was assigned to 5th Communication Battalion, 3rd Marine Amphibious Force, 3rd Marine Division, 3rd MAF. And anyway, about 2 or 3 days later, I woke up at night and there were a bunch of guys coming in, and it was about half a dozen of my former classmates that just arrived there. So long story short, we were together that whole year for radio school, that whole 13 months in Vietnam, and some of us ended up being together when we got back to the States. So our main base was right on the China Sea, China Beach, and a lot of the military main bases were right, along that area there. And we were just a little bit south of the city of Da Nang. There was an area called Marble Mountain, and there was a Marble Mountain Air Facility there, which had a north-south runway, and we were about half mile off that. And of course, you Google those things, and there's a luxury resort there now. The Track 97s, most of them were set up and established there, several years before I got over there. It was just a matter of maintaining them. If any of them got damaged, replacing them, parts, stuff like that. The first 3 months, 2.5, 3 months I was there, I worked in a radio repair shop, and it was a low echelon repair. If we couldn't solder it, we'd probably have to fix it or send it on to a higher echelon of repair. While I was there, I was on a react team for a 50 caliber machine gun mounted on top of a 6x, which is a big truck. And in the event a nearby bridge was attacked, we were to respond. And we got called out once, and that was interesting. We were, really excited that we were going to actually get to use this thing. and left the ammunition behind. Some guys in a pickup behind us saw it, they threw it in there and said, hey, you might need this. But by the time we got there, it was pretty much a done deal. There was also a place nearby, Monkey Mountain, which was a peninsula that went out into the China Sea. And we had a radio site there, and it was, there were areas there where there were radios set up, but there was a lot of space in between them and jungle in between. And every night they'd send up a few, maybe a fire squad or bigger, 6 or so people, so they could have some extra guns up there at night, just for their own peace of mind and stuff. And we'd get that about every other week. But that was about it. Being at the main base, things were pretty routine. Like I said, it was a microwave radio. I can't remember how many channels, but you could duplex them, slice a little bit of the frequency out and put some teletype information in that narrow band and get more use out of them. We had those set up all the way from up near the DMZ, near Dong Ha, and then farther inland around a place called the Rock Pile. The Rock Pile was actually a big outcropping of rock, but there was a base near there that we just referred to it as the Rock Pile. We had a couple there, then another at, I think it was Vandergrift, Combat Base Vandergrift, and I was at those places for a short time. Some of them were set up to be a troposcatter shot where the antennas be pointed to the sky, and you'd have to calculate, get the right angle so that signal would hit in the area where they were receiving it. And that's why they had 2 antennas to spread apart, because as the day progressed, it'd get hotter, it would get cooler, and that layer of the atmosphere would rise up and down, and the signal would waver back and forth. And the one track 97 that I had at that radio shot at FLC was a troposcatter shot, and it was pretty. They were pretty reliable. The ones around the Da Nang area were in pretty secure areas. Monkey Mountain was relatively secure, but when you got up around Phu Bai, Dong Ha, and that, you were getting closer to the DMZ and the Ho Chi Minh Trail and that. So I was at Phu Bai helping them set something up, and they had a ground attack that night. It didn't, we weren't that close to it, but we got to see all the action and stuff. But was there for about a week, and I was probably away from our main base for close to 2 weeks. They kept sending stuff, to different places. Can you go here? Can you go there? We can get it there by helicopter. Do you want to ride a helicopter? And I said, no, thanks. I saw one helicopter go down, and it wasn't because of any hostility. It was near the 3rd MAF headquarters. We had radios there as well. And there was a landing pad there, and it was nonstop helicopters with all the high-ranking people and everything. And we heard just an unusual noise. This helicopter took off, went across the road, landed, and it almost made it, but the rear rotor hit a utility pole, snapped it in half, and it burst into flames. And that I found out later, and when I say later, I mean like within the past 3 or 4 years, that helicopter was out of MAG-16, Marine Air Group 16, at Marble Mountain Air Facility, and Marines were crewing it, and it was full of Korean Marines, and there were a number of casualties on that. People couldn't get to them to rescue them because there's barbed wire separating the road from where they put down, so yeah. But spent a number of days at the Rock Pile, getting some stuff fixed up, tuning it, and just making sure it worked better. You'd have to adjust the antennas too. You'd look at meters for the signal strength and that, because they'd settle, or the wind might move them a little bit, that sort of thing. In Vandergrift, there was a lot of action there. There was an area when the infantry would go out into this area, they referred to it as Dodge City because there'd be a shootout almost every time they'd go there. So I was lucky. Everybody has a different story, and mine's very different. There were times when we'd be checking channels on the microwave radios, and we'd hear reports of, how many prisoners were taken, how many were killed, what they capture, how many bags of rice, polished rice, that type of thing in there. And sometimes that information conflicted with what we'd hear on the news. One of the things that happened in 1968, I think it was February or March, when Martin Luther King was assassinated, and that created a lot of racial tension in the military, and a lot of people were on edge. White Marines, black Marines, that type of thing. Interesting thing, and this happened before I got to Vietnam, but there was a fragging, our company major, he was in his office and he was sitting in a metal fold-out chair and plywood floor. A black Marine rolled a hand grenade under his office, and he was injured a little bit, but it didn't kill him. And there were situations like that went on, mainly it seemed like the main bases. The radio side I had for the last 3 months, there's myself, 2 other Marines that were black, and it was the 3 of us that operated that radio site. And when I got back to the main base before I came home, the one guy, he was a diesel mechanic, and he kept our generators running for the radios, and super good guy. And he didn't even acknowledge me when I got back to the main base. There was that, peer pressure. Sure. Yeah. Yep. My last 3 months that I was over in Vietnam, I ended up being responsible for a radio site, and it had 2 Track 97s and then one of the old tube Anger 10s. And that was used actually for ship-to-shore communication. There was a medical ship called the Sanctuary, and it would rotate between off the coast of Da Nang on up farther north around Dong Ha. But when it got to our area, the Da Nang area, we would establish communications with that ship. And of course we'd have to listen in to make sure it was working. And it wasn't even used for military purpose. The commander of the ship had a friend on shore, and it was used to catch up on the wife and kids and things like that. That was a big base. They had a dentist there, a bakery there, and it was just where all the supplies and everything were coming into. And everybody left us alone. They didn't know what we were there for. We just were the guys with the big radios and everything. We had just one event there where rockets came in at night, and some of the shrapnel got as far as where we were. We could see it on top of the. We had the actual radios inside a bunker with 50-gallon barrels filled with sand, stacked up, and then the top of it had sandbags on top and that, and we found some shrapnel up there on top of the sandbags and stuff. And I have some of that stashed somewhere at home. But the only person that was killed in our unit when I was in Vietnam, there's just one. His last name was Pandel, and that was an accident. He drove a pickup truck off the side of Monkey Mountain and crashed. And we happened to be back at the main base when they had a memorial service for him, and the guy I was telling you about, who we were in each other's weddings, well, we were at the memorial service, and the chaplain's assistant was going to play taps, and he couldn't get a sound to come out of the horn. And my friend's there, he says, do it. He knew I played the trumpet, and had heard me play it, and I was there, no. And finally the chaplain says, one of you can do this, can't you? So I said, yeah, I'll do it. When I got back to Camp Pendleton, I was back at Camp Pendleton. I had 9 months left, and another friend and I had that had been together all through radio school, Vietnam together, ended up teaching in radio operators school there. And anyway, he got out early, and I seriously thought about staying in. I liked what I did. The re-enlistment bonus for people with RMOS, and this was in the 60s, it was $12,000. And that was a pretty good chunk of change in those days. It just seemed like the lifestyle, everybody, going to the bars, and I don't have any problem with that, but it was just constant, and the peer pressure too, you go out with the rest of the guys and stuff. But I got a part-time job at one of the libraries on the base at Camp Pendleton, just so I'd have an excuse. No, I can't go out with you guys tonight, that type of thing. And I saw that same type of lifestyle with a lot of the career Marines. They were heavy drinkers, and I just didn't see myself living that lifestyle. I was fortunate in that I grew up in rural Nebraska, and a lot of the farmers there and everything were veterans. And when we got back from Vietnam, one of my friends, I said, "You got to come down here. They're having a big welcome back party." And he said, "Yeah, I'll be down." And one of the farmers, the small town bar, the guy closed down, and he brought kegs of beer out to the farm. There's, hamburgers and hot dogs and stuff like that, and poker games. And my friend says, "What'd you tell him, that you won the Medal of Honor?" And I said, "No, this is rural Nebraska." Yeah, I think I was fortunate in that respect. A lot of support. And just another example, when I got out of basic training, came back home and went into the local tavern. And in small towns, you got to realize it's like a community center. It's not a bunch of barflies hanging out there, that type of thing. And went in there and had my uniform on, and Dad went in with me. And I was 20, not old enough to drink, but Louis, the bartender, was a World War II veteran, came over and set a beer down. One of my classmates that was a year older than me, he says, "Louis, he's not old enough for that." And Louis says, "He's the only damn one out of the bunch of you that deserves it." I went back to school and ended up coming to Dubuque to finish up school. Went to Loras College and graduated in '75 and taught in the public school system for 33 years. I taught at Jefferson for 16 years. That was my last 16, and then my first 17 years I was an elementary school teacher. So, and after I retired from that, I went to work for the university here, adjuncting some computer information courses, and then some aviation courses. And eventually the department chair for the aviation program made me an offer I couldn't refuse. It was Steve Accinelli. He says, "How'd you like to come out to the airport and work with us?" And I said, "When do you want me?" So I've been there since. Well, I had a nephew named after me, Michael Andrew. And anyway, Phillips, he wanted to go into the Marine Corps, and this was Lincoln, Nebraska, and he couldn't pass the physical. He had pins in his shoulder from a hockey injury, and they DQ'd him. And one of the teachers I was working with up at Jefferson, her husband was a Marine Corps recruiter here, and I was kind of acquainted with him, and I told him about Michael, and he said, "Well, what's the deal?" And I said, "Well, he's driving his parents nuts. He won't go in any other branch of the service." And he said, "Do you think they care if I give him a call?" And I double-checked, and they'd love it if you'd call him. Long story short, he took him to get his physical here in Iowa, and he brought the x-rays, doctors explaining that those pins, no reason to take him out, no reason to leave him in, why cut him open to get at him. And he became a career Marine. And he passed away a few years ago from glioblastoma, the same brain cancer that John McCain had. And his last tour to the Middle East, at the main base, they were stationed downwind from a burn pit. And there's a lot of talk that there's, those people are experiencing, major health issues, and they suspect that that may have been the source. Yeah. Marines, it didn't make any difference what your MOS was. If they needed somebody to go out on a night ambush, they would do it, or a listening post, they would do it. And I did all of that stuff, but like I said, my story's different than a lot of the others, and I was very, very lucky. That bond is forever.
That's right.